Thursday, February 6th, House of Government Operations and Military Affairs. We are starting off the morning with an introduction of H67, an act relating to the legislative operations and government accountability. And we are joined with three members, two of which are members of our committee. So it's great to see you with a shift in table perspective. And we also have Representative Garofano here with us. It's good to see you, Representative. And this is picking up on work that has been on a trajectory in the legislature for some time now. We had a press conference earlier in the week speaking to some of the work that is going to be touched on in this bill. And with that, I just want to pass it off to you to fill us in on what's going on with your heads in your legislative meeting.
What's going on? I'm Shay Waters from Charlotte, represent Charlotte and part of Heinsberg.
I'm Lucy Barton, I represent Cambridge, 103.
And Ray Garofano, Essex and Essex Johnson.
So this is H67 is about government accountability and oversight. It is a modified version of a bill that was introduced last biennium by some members who had worked on the Summer Government Accountability Committee. Representative Boyden is going to tell you about that right now, and then I'm going to tell you what we are hoping to do moving forward and what our intent is with the content of the bill and where we're going to go.
Yeah, so the Summer Government Accountability Committee met throughout the summer of 2023 and then issued a report that had 11 recommendations. So last year in 2024, they submitted a short form bill, so there's no text there, and allowed our committee, the Committee of Government Operations and Military Affairs, to review the report and then develop the language alongside the bill. The bill passed through the House and kind of got stuck in the Senate, so it didn't make it through the finish line last year. So this is our second attempt at it. It's quite similar. I'll let you get into it, but
yeah,
it's quite similar to the bill last year. Just been a couple of weeks, and happy to elevate this report back to the committee just to review some of the recommendations and see if we're missing anything. But the overall purpose, like we were discussing, is just to make sure that we are checking back on what we as legislators are developing and asking agencies and departments to do, making sure that it's actually happening and happening as it was intended.
Yeah, I understand people are really worried right now. There's a national climate of organizations losing funding, or the threat of losing funding, or the promise of losing funding for certain programs. Our intention with this bill, which was honestly, obviously created well before what we're dealing with now, the intent is not to take things away from anybody who needs it, wants it, anything like that. I just want to be really clear that our goal is to make sure that the legislation that we pass, we do this all the time. We have reports and we have checkbacks and we have loop around and all of these other things that we're doing. And we get these reports, sometimes dozens of them in a day. And we're not always going through those with the diligence that we think they need to really accomplish the intent of why those checkbacks were put in the legislation in the first place, which is to make sure that the government is operating efficiently, that these programs, initiatives, whatever they are operating in the way that they were intended, and that they're achieving the goals that we legislatively said they were going to achieve those goals, and making sure that actually happens. We are trying to be more efficient. We are trying to save time. We are trying to save money. I want you to say this.
And it's also not intended for this to become a witch hunt of kind of combing through and being overly oversight, and I don't know. what word
Yeah,
I'm looking
Rep.
for.
Garfana is gonna address that in a second
Yes.
with, but yes, there's a process. So the first thing that happens in this bill is that it creates a joint government oversight and accountability committee, which is made up of representatives and senators. It does designate someone from the government operations committee in both chambers. That's really the only set parameter, and also has some, just to make sure there are no political ramifications, switches the chairmanship of that or chairpersonship of that committee back and forth each biennium to make sure it's not one party that's dominating the conversation. There's a provision in there to make sure that that all parties are represented on this committee. And there's a set process for deciding what departments, programs, initiatives we're looking at. It's not just, oh, I feel like looking at these guys today, and then that's what happens. There are rules that we're trying to identify, we not only want to find places where government oversight is failing, but we want to figure out why this is happening, right? And so there are parameters there include, it uses the phrases, a matter of significant public concern is one thing. And I'm sure we can all think of some that have come up over the past decades and stuff. And it's just making sure that it's not targeting, or that specific groups of people, who are vulnerable aren't being harmed, or that it's a really huge amount of money that we're dealing with and that the committee feels like is being mismanaged. So this committee, this Joint Government Oversight and Accountability Committee, is going to choose what areas they look at based on specific criteria. It's just like Rep. Boyden said, to make sure that it's not whimsical or
I think like,
biased.
biased or has like a political agenda attached to it. Like this needs to be about like the function of the government in a nonpartisan fashion.
Yeah,
Are these programs, systems, boards, commissions, dollars out, whatever it is, doing what they were intended to when these laws and appropriations were made?
Yeah.
In my head, as we've walked through this over a couple of years, it's really almost like checking back in for almost like a performance audit,
yeah,
but not necessarily dollars, but also policy application out to the public so people are feeling the impacts of the policy decisions, but also at a price the taxpayers get for it.
right.
Right?
And realistically, every standing committee should be doing their own government accountability oversight check back of reviewing what they've passed in the past couple of years or past biennium. Similarly, how you mentioned in the press conference, or I think Rep. Wood mentioned that the House Human Services Committee has been doing that. But this committee would assist with also looking back a little farther to 10 years or so.
Yeah, so we're trying to go back
We
in
have- we
time.
just heard that we are detecting poor voice quality. We just got a flash on the screen. I don't know if that is the ear or the elevation of your voice.
I hope it's not a judgment. There's nothing I can do about this. It is out.
Your words were quite eloquent.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll just add, so I'm a 20-year veteran of state government. So when I'm not here, I work in state government and have done so for the last 20 years. And I think this bill will help not only streamline what we do in this building, but also help the administration and government operations run better and easier and more streamlined. Having this committee will help inform what laws have been passed and what is being proposed and what impact the new proposals will have on the previous laws to make sure that it all works and identify efficiencies, and hopefully save money. And I did want to note that I would hope that you would consider having this committee also make recommendations to the General Assembly as far as, things committees can do to do their own oversight for their jurisdiction. And as far as there's a section in the bill about having like specific audits. I am I want to put out there, that was my idea of trying to kind of figure out a way to look at specific programs or have some kind of systematic way of reviewing different agencies, departments to make sure that what we're funding is producing the outcomes that we intended. But I see the committee being able to do that within their work once they're stood up.
Yeah, and so the committee has interesting powers.
Well, I can speak to that for a moment. So there was the former iteration of this bill, it was, what was it, H702? Last biennium had much more significant powers given to this committee. There was subpoena power and all kinds of stuff that
But that's not in.
was not popular. So we are, what
Of
we're,
course, it's not gonna be popular.
right. In the
But is
interest,
it necessary?
in the interest of compromise, progress, moving forward in a deliberate fashion, what we've decided to do is keep the possibility of those powers in this bill by saying that there's the potential for that in the future. That's going to be something that the General Assembly can decide at some point. We are obviously think it's a good idea to have that, but also understand that that's a big power to give a group of people, and that it needs to be considered carefully and worked on very deliberately. So in the interest of thoughtfulness and care, we're inching our way toward that as a possibility, but it's not something I think we think is essential to moving this bill forward and accomplishing what we need to accomplish. It might be in the future, but for now, it's a negotiable item, I think, in the sense that it does need to exist in some form at some point, but not right this second.
So I'm just using that, I'm shifting hats for a moment as the only member who served on a special committee that had subpoena power. And in the depth and breadth of those sort of investigatory functions, it was certainly a good resource to have when people were not being compliant with requests.
Yes.
Yeah.
The hope
So,
is that people
It
are
is a big
compliant with
responsibility, it
requests.
is a big tool in the toolbox, but I definitely would like to speak to that because I've seen it work effectively.
Yeah,
Sure.
so we've added it to the committee's first report back to the General Assembly, to specify if they would find it useful to have the ability to have subpoena power. So directing them to look into that, consider it, and include it back for then us to, not us, but the General Assembly to provide it.
Questions from the table? Representative Nugent.
Do you have any examples you could give of like what type of issue this might look into?
Look at all of us not wanting to name a specific program, initiative, or department. I don't think we can get to that point right now, but I will say, here's the thing, whenever we pass legislation here or start a program or a committee or a commission or any of these things, I believe that our intention is always to do good, to help solve a problem, to address an issue that's been problematic in the past and to make things smoother and easier in the beginning. Our intentions, the reality doesn't always catch up with our intentions. And the fact is, we don't have a lot of money. We are responsible for spending Vermonters' money, right? And we want to make sure that we're doing it in a really thoughtful way, and that if there are things that we can identify, like specific programs that I'm not going to name, but that are not achieving goals, not that people aren't doing good work, or not that people aren't trying their hardest to do what they have been charged with doing, but just sometimes it just doesn't work out. And that we need to identify those areas where it's not working out and either make changes so that it does in the future, or say, okay, this was a good idea, it's not panning out the way we planned. Maybe this iteration of helping or solving a problem has to pause or come to an end, and we can address it in a different way that might be more helpful.
I'll just add, I'm not gonna name an agency, but I will add something that we can use as a model, is a childcare bill that we passed in 2023 that we actually built the accountability and oversight within that legislation. So we get a report back every year, and we just had that presentation last Friday where they we appropriated money to an external agency to actually do this review and make sure that the huge investment we made is doing what we intended to do. And I think as a body, we can use that example, and, any future investment or policy should, especially large ones like that, should have some kind of accountability built in. And I think this committee will help put in processes that will ensure that in future.
Yeah, I think it's like so important, and I think it's part of this conversation we're having with the public, and it's an ongoing thing that will change even like what we decide to measure, whether, what outcomes we're looking at, and like what measures changes with, the public and what we value. But I think just having the conversation is so important, and like everybody should be invested in the outcomes that we're getting. So thank you for all the work that you're doing on it.
Thank you.
Representative Stone.
And I'm guessing y'all like seen this in other states. This is not a new idea. This is not like we're inventing the wheel here, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Last year we heard testimony from, I believe it was New Mexico, and the summer committee also heard testimony from them. They have a very elaborate government oversight and accountability system. They have a lot of staff too. And they're just really digging into looking back and making sure that there's oversight and accountability with everything that they're doing. Right now, there's no staff built into this, but it's also in that report that I previously mentioned for the committee to consider if it would be helpful for them to have a specific staff member that is pointed at government oversight and accountability.
That makes me feel better. I just wanted to say the Levin Institute also released information just showing like overall institutional capacity for oversight. And Vermont did not really score great on that report card. It said that we had limited capacity, especially in comparison to the states that surround us. So I really appreciate this, just so that we get up to speed with our neighboring states and the rest of the country. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
You're gonna be seeing our faces a bunch more times. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, every day for two of you.
As I move down to that.
And I was like, we'll see you every day.
Literally.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Lucy.
Lucy scoots her way down.
Nice, we are in. Well done, sir, well done.
He's gotta get her a transport chair.
Drop Sandy's seat up there for the duet on this.
No.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Pretty low on the level.
Okay, folks, well, that's, we don't have anything up till 11 o'clock, so we had a bunch of stuff to work on leading up to
Yeah.
future testimony on a bunch of items. So, Autumn, take us off to
You too.
convene at